Hello, my name is Jason Reichl, and you're listening to Risk Management Brick by Brick. I'm fascinated with people who are helping build and maintain the physical world around us. On each episode of this podcast, we'll dive in with a risk manager, speak to them about how technology plays a role in this process. In today's episode, we're going to do something a little bit different. It's the new year. I'm feeling like I want to get to the mailbag. Often guests, people who listen to the podcast, send in some questions, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to answer those questions as honestly as I can. Let's get into the episode. Question number one, what are your thoughts about risk management and why do you think it's important? This is a common question, really, my friends ask me, but I feel like it deserves an honest answer. I think that jobs that are responsible for building the world around us are absolutely critical to the success of everyday life. I grew up in this cross-section of the physical world and the digital world. And what I mean by that is my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather all worked as longshoremen. And that was really important to me and my family. I had a sense of pride that my family worked on the docks and helped bring goods into the country. But me personally, I grew up with computers and technology. And very early on, I was interested in business related to technology. I started my first internet company when I was 16 years old, using technology, building websites for the community around me, like most kids did in the 90s. And then I helped build the first redundant server cluster with a company I worked at called Rackspace, which helped create the cloud. And I'm really proud of those accomplishments. I'm really proud that I'm a digital native, so to speak. But I always felt like I wanted to do the cross-section of technology in the physical world. And that enters Trust Layer. At Trust Layer, I was really interested in the fact that they built software catering to risk management professionals. I really valued risk management. It was something that I always kind of was around because my father and my grandfather would talk about construction risk managers that they were working with on their jobs and all of those kind of things. And I just was really interested in it because one, it feels like risk management is part data scientist. They have to be into human behavior and how behavior impacts the way that we're going to act in the job site or in the community. And they have to really be system thinkers because they can solve problems individually, but really in order to be effective, they have to solve the problem holistically across a wider system. And I found that really cool creative professionals are in this field and it actually matters to everyday life, which is very cool and why I think it's important. Question two, how do you feel about being a host of a risk management, construction, and technology podcast? I gravitate to industries where people are doing something critically important to the world around us, as I mentioned in question one. So from that perspective, I really enjoy being the host of this podcast. I enjoy learning both how risk managers think and also how they create a problem solve. I really admire people who are using data to creatively solve problems. I think that good problem solving comes out of constraints, and every risk manager I've talked to really thinks about the big picture before they make decisions. And I find that to be a really mature place to do system thinking from. So I feel great about being the host of this podcast. How has hosting the podcast changed your views on risk management? I think I had a perspective going into this that risk managers would be more like my experience with working with finance people. But in reality, they're way more in tune with human behavior than I expected. And a lot of them come from backgrounds that are really fascinating and have gotten to their place in risk management by following passion or following some kind of intense curiosity. Curiosity seems to be a theme that a lot of risk managers talk about. And at least on the podcast, I haven't many risk managers who are just doing it for the paycheck. They seem to really be interested in it from a passion perspective. And that passion for the art of dissecting risk really comes through. And I'm attracted to that passion. And so that passion has really changed my perspective of it's a numbers game into really is being done because it is valuable to the world around us to have individuals looking at the best way to assess risk, the best way to keep people safe, and the best way to help companies make good revenue. And I call good revenue money that is properly and intentionally gone after and understanding either the risk or mitigating the risk, as I found out through this podcast. What skills and experiences from your current role at Trust Layer are helpful for your hosting duties? Well, I'm the CRO of Trust Layer, which means I manage the strategy and the people of the marketing, sales, and customer success teams at the company. My belief in people and their dedication to their craft is carried over to the podcast because I believe operations and strategically finding and solving problems in organizations leads to revenue. So as a CRO, I really believe that You have to trust the people working within roles, which is risk managers are working with people who have very diverse skill sets. And they have to understand them and trust that they're good tradespeople and that they are actually working towards something and that they know what they're doing. At the same time, they have to look at it from a step back and make sure that there's a general strategy or risk mitigation put across it. And I found that being a CRO and thinking a lot about the strategy and individuals has really helped me understand how risk managers think. And I brought that to the podcast. So I think that's how my everyday job helps me be a solid host on this podcast. Question 5. What topic raised and discussed on the podcast has always been in the back of your mind and why? I think the most important question I have is how to transform the risk management function into a strategic part of an organization. It is a strategic part, no doubt, but often it's looked at as maybe a cost center, or it's not looked at as this part of the organization where it can really be a value differentiator or a revenue generator. And I think it is that, because going after jobs and projects in a healthy way and de-risking that work and properly calling out the risks is mitigating and creating an environment for success. And so when I'm thinking through that, I think, when the economy, if it slows down, if there is a recession, if there's these things that are happening, risk management becomes even more critical. And I think that in times of stress, these really important strategically operational focused roles really shine in organizations. And I think that you'll see the companies who have great risk managers be the ones that are ultimately more successful and grow faster during a time of uncertainty than those who don't have great risk management programs and great risk managers working for them. 6, who would be some dream guest to have on the show? I want to do this podcast to shine light on great organizations where their risk management program was a real value add to the company. Sometimes those teams don't have the loudest, most self-branded person out there. And what I mean by that is in certain industries, you get talking heads all the time. And what I found when I started this podcast is a lot of the people that are really, really good at it aren't out there talking about how they're really, really good at it. And so you had to look for more organizations that were really growing and organizations that seem to be doing interesting work in the construction space. And then behind that, there was usually a risk management team who were doing things in a more innovative way. And that's how I kind of think about what my dream guests are. I think more about the organization, and then I get interested in who are the risk managers that are making that organization successful. What's the best thing about interviewing these successful professionals? Well, their system thinking is top notch. So the way that they approach problems, and they don't think very linearly, they think in events and triggers. And when I talk about system thinking, you might think, oh, that's linear, but it's not. Because when you have linear thinking, what happens is you stop once you think you've solved A. But every one of the guests that I've talked to in depth about how they approach problems, they really approach it holistically, which is a way of thinking about everything sort of as an ecosystem, which is a really impressive skill and usually used for creative strategists and really jobs that really define industry in the past. And I've been very excited to find that in risk managers. I think I've had the pleasure of working alongside some of the most advanced technology companies out there, and I'm constantly impressed by risk management professionals because while I've worked with very innovative, smart programmers or product managers or all the different roles that work within a tech company, risk managers are actually really highly creative. Sometimes they're solving problems that have never really been solved before. They're analytical and they're result oriented, which is really, really interesting. So I think I've learned a lot. I think I've learned not to sound like the tech guy, but when you're a tech person, you sometimes think, yeah, I'm working around the most intelligent people I could possibly be working around. I've been humbled, quite honestly, by the way that a lot of my guests think about their work and the way that they approach it. And I think I've grown as a professional by doing this podcast. Number 8, what is the most common issue in the industry you often encounter? Well, the most common issue by far is a fear in the professionals I'm talking to about the gap of incoming individuals who want to be risk managers. I think because the job is so encompassing, a lot of times people are not really going out there and doing a good job evangelizing the job. And people coming in from the business world and other things or insurance, they don't really look at risk management as maybe a viable place for them to go into an organization and be successful. And so a lot of professionals in the industry are afraid that there is a drying up of talent, that there's not enough young, hungry people coming into the industry. And that was one of the catalysts for wanting to do the podcast, is that we wanted to shine a light on this. We wanted to be able to raise the volume, so to speak, so that we could attract really smart, bright people into risk management. I think also highlighting risk managers so that young people who are in it could reach out and find mentors in this space was another big reason for wanting to do the podcast. But it is a common issue that when I'm at a conference or when we're off the air, that often risk managers are talking to me about. Number 9, what's the process behind finding and choosing a guest for the podcast? I usually look on LinkedIn for people who seem like they want a platform to broadcast their ideas. I think in an age when we all have personal brands, it's critical that I look for people who seem like they might be fun to actually talk to. I love hearing from people who have good stories on when they did a good job. I love hearing the stories when things didn't go quite right. So I look for people who are being intentional, who are trying to look for a platform that could broadcast out their voice. One of the nice things about working in technology companies is that often we are backed by a VC. And so we get to do projects that highlight our customers or highlight the organizations that we work with. And Brick by Brick is no different, right? I work at TrustLayer. We sell a risk management platform. But one of the value adds, or one of the things I really enjoy about my job, is that I get to help people from this industry broadcast out the things that they're concerned about. And I find that to be a really worthwhile endeavor. Question 10. Is there an interesting fact that you've learned from your interviews? That risk is part of the world is a fact. I think that is like a no-duh thing. But when you're really talking to risk managers, you realize the thing that you're most afraid of happens and it's normal. That term snafu is a real term and it really happens every single day. And I think I also learned that managing it doesn't mean eliminating it. I think that sounds, again, like a no shit kind of thing. But to be honest, I didn't really understand before starting the podcast how risk managers really did their job, what risk management really entailed, and how much of their job involved changing the contractors' and employees' behaviors. That was also very eye-opening. I think the story about green hard hats that was told on an episode a couple ago was a really eye-opening one, where small incremental systematic changes can have big impact to both the success of projects and the safety of those projects. What's a topic in the industry that you would like to focus an episode on? I would like to focus some episodes on what tools or systems do the most successful risk managers use. I really like I'm a nerd about what tools people use, down to their pens, their notepads, to their systems, the way they organize. I really like learning about that. I'm learning through this process that I probably would have been a good risk manager because I like to think about things like that. I would also like to showcase some stories from start to end. I would like to present a problem that a risk manager is addressing within their organization, and then they're thinking as they go through that. So I'd love to do an episode with an organization that comes to the start of the podcast with a problem that they're trying to solve, and then maybe we check back in with them, or maybe we do the whole episode. And by the end of it, you get to see how they've impacted, good or bad, the outcome based on how they think about risk management. I think that would be a really interesting episode. Number 12, and last question. Where would you like to see Brick by Brick in a year's time? A couple things that come to mind. I'd like to see us talk more about case studies and following a project through. I really love a beginning, middle, and end. And I love these interview series that we're doing. But sometimes I want to follow that interview series past the story and really see the problem. And I think that would be a really interesting way to tackle this. So I'm looking into ways that maybe we could do a mini series or something that's a little bit smaller, that is thematic, that is not just interviews, but more how you could follow along and see how people attack that. So I'd like to see us do more of that. And I would also love to visit you live. Like, I would love to do a live podcast at an event. I would love to see the people listening to the show. And quite frankly, I'm kind of tired of being in my office. I'm excited to get out and talk to people in person. I'm excited maybe to go to some conferences and cover what's happening at conferences so that people know what's happening in risk management if you can't make it to these conferences, and really just be part of the community. It's been so welcoming to me in a digital format that I would love to take this and make it in a physical format. So that's it. That's 12 easy questions I answered honestly. Try to make this one a quick one. I can't wait to get more guests this upcoming year on the podcast. It's been really, really outstanding. I get questions every day. And thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. And I hope that you're enjoying Brick by Brick. And I'll see you next time. Thank you. Risk Management Brick by Brick is brought to you by TrustLayer. Find out how TrustLayer manages risk so that the people can build the physical world around us. Head over to trustlayer.io. And then make sure to subscribe to Risk Management Brick by Brick on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. On behalf of the TrustLayer team, thank you for listening.